And then come to talk about ministers. And before we said Jack, 110. Like, Jesus Christ, what is this? What do you need 110 ministers for? And he defends it. He says that at the end of the tenure, we will tell that he's doing something good. No.
You don't believe it?
Again, that was such a wrong start. I still think that when he's thinking about reshuffle and stuff, he would come to the thinking that he doesn't need some of the ministries that he created. For example, if you create a minister or a ministry to be in charge of public procurement, I mean, what is that for?
Saraja Safo.
What is that for? We have the Public Procurement Authority in place that will do the job you are requiring a minister to do. In any case,
there are entity tender committees all over the place.
Exactly. In any case, you know, a minister like that will be seen even if they are doing the right thing and not exhibiting political bias in what they do, will be seen to be doing something rather pandering to the whims and caprices of the president or the political authority at the time, rather than an authority that by law acts in a manner that you could say it's capable of acting without, you know, too much of political influence.
Let me come to Shamima.
No, I need to end on that thing.
Okay.
There again, I say we need to wake up. You have provided for a constitution that gives the president power any time to dream and to say, I want to appoint this, I want to create this ministry, and they go about doing so. What kind of, you know, society is that?
You want the constitution to limit the number of ministers? Is that not tying the hands of president? Is that not tying the hands of president?
You ought to do so. You ought to tie the hand of the president.
To what effect?
There ought to be checks in place. In the least, there ought to be checks in place. Because next time, you never know which president you will get, who would want double the number he has had. And the constitution doesn't stop him. He can just get up and create them and fix anybody in there. And you have nothing to say about that.
Shamima, something clearly is not persuaded by the president's argument that he needed this large number of ministers to prosecute his ambitious agenda of developing the country. Do you share his views?
Well, I don't depart substantially from Samson's position on this particular matter. Just as many citizens, you know, express the same view. Let me just try and set a setting frame for, you know, my contributions this morning, because obviously this year, as we have been invited by the president, we are trying to encourage an ALMA as well. We are trying to encourage citizen participation in the political process and engagement as well. I think that we all can't wait to be doctors, professors, politicians, ministers, or lawyers, to have opinions about our reality.
Or journalists.
You know, or journalists for that matter. We often leave ourselves out, you know, to have opinions about what we want our lives to be like and the quality of life that we envisage. So for every young person who is watching this morning, really my purpose here is towards them, because we have to have these conversations and these engagements, because the greatest challenge is that partisan politics is debilitating. Partisan politics is eroding our moral fabric. Our ethical values have been almost eroded, because it seems like there's no objective truth anymore. People are engaged in fiestas to establish their alternative truths as the reality, and really it's a big problem. And we are saying we have to have a certain objective method of assessing, you know, ethical behavior and values, especially for public offices.
Regardless of where you stand.
Regardless of
what is ethical is ethical, what is not is not.
Because professionalism, and when we talk about politicians, we leave out the public service. The public service is also part of the problem. So we need to look at this objective method of assessing both public service as well as politicians. And for me, the ethical foundations are there. Anybody who's ever sat in an ethics class knows about these ethical foundations, knows about these moral reasonings and principles. So it's really time to bring back the ethical discourse into our conversations and scrap away the sentimentality and class politics of insulting and bullying behavior that seems to shut good citizens, up.
That's a lot of English this morning.
Yes, because it's a serious thing. So bring back our ethical values, I'm saying, and we need to reinstate them and reinforce them. Because you see, actions are taken by actors with a certain motive towards a certain consequences. So this is the four-way test. And in all of the stories we should be discussing, we are looking at actions, we're looking at the motive behind the actions, we're looking at the actors and the character of the actors, and we're looking at the consequence of those actions, whether they portend good for our society or ill for our society. So on this matter of 110 ministers, we've given a president, as Samson has said, overarching and overreaching powers to appoint and disappoint with no explanation and reason. When I asked a question on my Facebook post, expecting a certain response from asking, as a citizen, my president to explain the reason for accepting the resignation of Richard Kwetu, for example, I had some assigns of government come hard at me, telling me that the president doesn't owe us or anyone an explanation. You see, and this is the arrogance of power. The president is my president, is your president, is everybody's president. In fact, he is the father of the nation, and I can choose to ask the father of the nation any question that I want at any point in time. People often want to refer you to, oh, where were you when this person did this? Where were you? Well, the question is, where were you when Nkrumah was fighting for Ghana? Why didn't you have an opinion then? You see, because we all come into opinions from our different experiences and our situations at any point in time. So unless you can show consistently that somebody is being consistently hypocritical in taking a certain stance, it really beats my imagination to water down somebody's want to ask a question by saying, where were you when somebody was doing that? I was where I was. Where were you, when this is happening? And this is what is really eating at. You have a
fundamental problem with the over-politicization of any matter in this town.
If we don't watch it, it's going to erode our democratic experiment, which ought not to be an experiment.
Where you said, do you think there's hope? Because it appears it's getting worse by the day.
Well, there's only hope if the people rise to the new challenge and recognize that, where the nation is going. If we don't do anything about it, everybody will be shut down. So the so-called neutrals and the so-called swing voters who do not have any emotive or sentimental connection to any political party and ideology, that's the critical mass that can help us really change this narrative. Because if the politicians collude to shut the citizens up because the citizens fear to be tagged and bullied and trolled on media, then the politicians are going to have their way. And we can't possibly allow that to happen. So 110 ministers was a bit definitely on the high side. And we've done 1 year. At least by now, the president should tell us what has been the productivity of this 110 ministers.
You are live on Joy News channel. You are live on Joy 99.7 FM. This is 2017 in review. Finally, the late Ifya Pokia has joined us.
You said the late.
She's joined us. Ifya, welcome.
Thank you.
We missed you.
Yes.
How are you?
I'm good.
Good to see you. You're looking good, man.
Thank you.
Anyway, so Samson, Shamima have been giving us what, in their view, have been the biggest stories for the year. We are at in fact, we are still in January. In fact, 7th of January. We haven't gone beyond January 7th. So they are talking about 110 ministers. And there's a certain unanimity. I hope that you will depart from that. There's a unanimity amongst the two of them that this is a no-no, that the numbers were way too high. Something expresses disappointment. Shamima says she will not depart from that. Where do you stand?
I was listening on my way, and let me apologize for being late. Very long, crazy drive, and I overslept, because I've been working throughout the holidays. Forgive me, very sorry. If I were a judge, I think I would say that I agree with them and I have nothing useful to add.
Thankfully, you are not.
Yeah, I have nothing useful to add. Except to say that the 110 ministers, I agree absolutely with what Samson and Shamima have said. It was outrageous. to say the least. 110 ministers. Now, I've always said that these people are adding up to Article 71 office holders who will be drawing ex gratia awards from the taxpayers. We've always complained in Ghana about how this ex gratia issue is affecting the general welfare of this economy. The argument has even been proposed that it's high time we do away with it and become like any other employee of the state. People are on state pension and other tier 2 and all that. Why can't these Article 71 office holders be on the same pension scheme that everybody is on?
But if you want to put resources in the hands of the people, you have to take care of them better in order that they will not steal the resources.
But over the years, since we started with 1992 Constitution, we've seen it that despite the fact that we are paying ex gratia awards, it's actually not done anything in terms of fighting corruption. In terms of making these public office
maybe it would be worse if they were not paid that.
Well, that's a maybe. That's a guesswork. I don't think that that's what democracy is about. We are not doing what my father used to say, "Matrai makwe." No, this is serious business. You know, we cannot continue to be lamenting over the state of this nation.
Do you share Samson's view that the Constitution ought to have put a cap on the number of persons that any president can appoint as ministers?
I would disagree. I would disagree because you see, it's a human institution, and things change, situations change. The state of the nation at every particular time will determine the number of ministers and their portfolios and how they will deliver. How they will actually deliver on the objective of building the
Now
nation.
the president is telling you that the state of the times require that he should have 110.
Well, but that is only the president's own thinking. We, the citizens, say that we disagree. And the president is working on our behalf. We are saying we disagree. 110 is the highest number ever. And so far, Malik, over the last year, what have we seen? Have we seen any significant impact of these so-called 110 ministers on our state, on our welfare, on our benefits, on the economy? We haven't. And then the argument is always forwarded that, oh, it's too early, 1 year is not enough, it's still the honeymoon period. Yeah, it's not enough. We know that we've been under a particular leadership, you know, that has delivered a certain objective over the years, and we said that we're not satisfied and we voted that government out. And you are here. So, and the president's own remarks that he's in a hurry. He said that. He's in a hurry. So 110 minutes.
You're not seeing anything that demonstrates that he's in a hurry?
Oh, well, I see that he has passion. Like Samson said, he's worked very closely with Nana Addo. I've monitored the politicians, President Mahama, Nana Addo. I followed Professor Mills on his campaign. Yes, he has, you can see that as a person, that desire, that passion to impact and make a difference is there. But after a year, we haven't seen that.
Samson, which one for you is a bigger problem? The fact that the 110 constitute a drain on the public purse, or that there are so much duplications that people are simply confused as to what they have to do, there are competing roles, there are arguments, and so the work doesn't get done? Which one is a bigger problem?
It's unjustifiable. It's unreasonable on a poor country. It does not confirm his pledge to protect the public purse. You are coming in and you announce from the start you're going to cut taxes. You talk about how much there is little, and yet you need 110 ministers, some of whom will do practically nothing or will be duplicating what others do. So, you see, irrespective of all the justifications that have been put up, let's ask ourselves, we are not reinventing the wheel. When I spoke about cuts, I was careful to add that in the list there ought to be checks. So there could be cuts on a cap on the ministries to have, or ministers to have, or we could have checks. A system that doesn't leave the president to just get up one morning and say, I want a minister for bicycle affairs because I want a lot more Ghanaians to ride bicycle. So he creates one and justifies it. And you can do nothing about it. You can do nothing about it. That is what I'm telling you is the very wrong situation we have. By the nature of Article 70, by the nature of some of the laws that we have passed, the Acts of Parliament, including a most ridiculous one, and I suspect it's not limited to that one only. Again, it tells you what job our parliamentarians also do, that a president must have the time to appoint a PRO for a state-owned company. PRO.
And you're talking about Ghana Gas.
Please, a president. The president must not have time for that. President, obviously, must not have time for that. And guess what? When we are appointing such persons to, even if you want to do it within just the party, as in the NPP, I have good number of friends in the NPP. I know so many people within the NPP who are far better qualified, and you appoint people that if they were to compete for the job, okay, they will not meet the first threshold. They will not pass it. That tells me from the start that I ought to be careful in believing what you're telling me to believe.
Shamima, are we not ignoring the political reality here?
That's what I was about to
You spoke about a president who took long, steady walk into the presidency. Along the way, he must have been held by very many people who all need some kind of favor or another, and he owes a lot of people. He started this journey way back in 1998, or maybe even earlier than that.
Certainly does.
So by the time he is in the presidency, he owes so many people that we can complain all we want, we can be angry all we want. There's a political reality, and that political reality dictates his actions other than our frustrations.
And it's democracy is an expensive business, and democratic institutions are formed and run by the political parties, are the main actors of political democracy. So it's finding the golden mean. Aristotle will say the golden mean between, you know, excessiveness and deficiency. So it's a political expediency decision, but in all this, the public good must always be the consideration, because your political party is just part of the society. And when you come and stand before the good people of Ghana and seek their mandate, you're often not speaking to just your political party members, in fact, but for the contributions of other citizens. No political party might be able to win an election in this country. So you cannot discount the general public good. But the reality also is that it is individuals within the party that run a campaign and expect a certain reward, and just the way human nature is. So I can imagine the kinds of pressures, and we have even still seen the pressure still being mounted from those who have had no appointments whatsoever, quite upset with the president, and sometimes it's leader, you know. And the bottom line is that you can't please everybody, but 110 ministers, 2-3 deputy ministers was just a bit on the high side. And for a president that, again, promised us that he was coming to protect the public purse within the first year, what was the assessment of, I beg your pardon, of the task at hand? Because again, they are often quick to refer to the fact that this is the first year. We are still understanding the system. If you are understanding the system, if you are planning, you actually do not need huge numbers to plan. So if you actually want us to believe that the first year is a planning year and a strategy year, you actually do not need within the first year 110 ministers. Because again, if we don't want the public service, let us scrap it. Because this is the public service that is full of consultants, of specialists, of, you know, it is huge.
Special assistants, aides,
PROs,
staffers.
All of these things are within the public service. So we do have resource within the public service, and they are expected by law to be professional and provide technical advice to ministers who come and go.
And I note your use of the word expected to be professional. Are they professional?
They too have become, well, that's a problem with our public service that I made reference to. So even within our public service, we are having issues of partisanship. So a new government comes in and there's mistrust of everybody around them, and sometimes justifiably so, because you can't understand why certain documents continue to be leaked. You know, so perhaps the public servants have also not proven that they could be trusted. So the onus lies on all of us. Everybody needs to reassess themselves and ensure that they do right by this nation.
Maybe when you have in every entity and every ministry a department of sort that does monitoring and evaluation, and you still have a minister that will do monitoring and evaluation, so the documents will leak because all of them have to send them to one place, I suspect. I mean, please, is it
but
because
the documents were leaking?
Is it because you're sitting where you are sitting?
The documents were leaking before the ministry was set up.
Obvious needless duplication.
Well, I'm just asking the question.
Waste of the public purse.
But so the fact is that yes, the president has to balance the expectations of party as well as government and states, as well as, you know, the expectations of the citizen. And often that is a very difficult balance.
Are we not too hard on him then?
Well, but the fact is, in all of this, it is the interest of the greatest number of people that matter. And like I said, you can justify the numbers, but then justify the outcomes and the impact. Because if we are not seeing the outcomes and the impact, it means that we have wasted money within this year. So I'm saying that this year shouldn't have been the year. In fact, maybe your reshuffle, at which time you now know that you've developed your plans, they are comprehensive, because you don't need a large team to actually do that. You don't need a large team to do that. So your plans are intact, you know what you're doing, your Asempa budget, your Ejuma budget, you know what tools you now need, what resources you now have at the various ministries that you can draw on, what other resources you need. Because we ought not to create the impression, even for party members, that the surest way to progress and prosperity and eudaimonia is through the public service. That you ought to become a political appointee. And that is why everybody is rushing to politics. And Nanado told us that if you wanted money and business, stay in the private sector. Don't come into politics. So you shouldn't be seen to be giving us, you know, conflicting images.
Something is that what is happening
here. Stay in the
here.
public sector and then employ 110 ministers. Tells me that, well, there's a possibility that I can get into government and leverage my influence in government.
Are you seeing a dissonance between what the president says and what he does? Is there contradiction?
Marika, I have told you, I have summed up what my views are about the number of ministers. In fact, there are words that pop up in my head, but I can't use them.
Thankfully.
I can only be reasonable by using the words I have used. Because once again, I ask you, does it make sense to have a minister in charge of monitoring and evaluation when almost each department and ministry has monitoring and evaluation? You have a senior minister. Now we've had problems with that creation. I suppose we're told now that the EI executive instrument has been done appropriately. What is he there for?
Yeah, because his budget was rejected.
No, but what is he there for? Is the president saying that he's giving the job we have given him to someone else to do, or that he doesn't have the time to do that job? Okay. The vice president is there, a very agile, focus-minded, sharp mind around also. What is he also supposed to be doing? What do we need a senior minister to do? I don't get it. You see, irrespective of the countless number of justifications that I've been giving, I say all of those things came together to give me a sense, to tell myself that I needed to be cautious in taking the words of the president from the inaugural speech. And also, taking his words, some of the things that, beautiful things that he had to say. And you see, I take him to heart. But he just broke my heart when I got to see the manifestations of the things that he needed to do to, for example, restore integrity in the governance system. Because obviously, there were jobs being created for the boys at the expense of the state. And that was unfair. So unfair to us, the citizens, okay? This unprecedented number, he goes down in history as being the one who has done this ever, even though he's the one who has claimed to have the most competent team, okay, to have the best of competencies to be able to deliver on the job. Look, President Akufo-Addo has the experience that you can't find within the political elite in the country now, because he's gone through all of it. He's been in parliaments, he's been a minister, and beyond that, he has shown in his private life, okay? He has shown in his private life that, look, I have what it takes to do the right things. So when he does those things, you get disappointed, okay? And you now begin to hedge how you fall on the worst.
There's a lot of disappointment around the table.
But to be fair,
no, you see,
to be fair,
I told you that I'm starting with my disappointments.
That's fair.
The good
And
things
of course, my
That's
disappointments will include other things that we'll have to speak about.
Great.
Things that I felt that the president had a handle on, and yet didn't come in at the time he was required, or didn't appear to have stamped his authority. Okay, we'll get to those other matters.
Right.
And
so Shamima had.
I just wanted to say that to actually be fair, the action has already taken place, and if we were to apply my 4 weights of action, actor, consequence, and motive, we can only effectively assess, you know, the rightness or wrongness of this decision at the end of the tenure.
Maybe
of
we are
course, we
doing
can
this
review and
in the
give
hope that when he
indications
is
that he should ensure also that he's keeping his eye on his appointees and that they are actually delivering, so that he can, in his monitoring and evaluation of his work, find those that are extraneous, excessive, and cut them off in the next year. So the point of this conversation is just to let the presidency and the appointees know that to whom much is given, much is expected. And there's a new Ghanaian who will not sit and keep quiet and not, you know, demand accountability from those that will power. Yes, from those that will.
Why should we wait to the end to know the value in the numbers? If you cannot strengthen the justification, if you cannot strengthen the institutions that exist already to fight filth in the community, and you need a minister to do that job, I have questions about
if the minister does that job and brings value.
What you mean by saying you are coming to replace an incompetent government? Okay,
but I think that the reality of it is that in Africa, this is very typical of governance in Africa. There's a difficulty that every government that comes to power has to grapple with. The reality is that you have so many people who contributed to your win. The kind of elections that we run,
I asked Shamima.
The kind of elections that we run in Africa, the system and the structures that refuse to work consistently force politicians to rely on certain people and therefore become obliged.
And yet you don't want a cap or a check on the
not necessarily. I'm thinking that, well, I'm just thinking that the situation may change. You see, I feel that most European countries or countries in the West have actually gone through this phase. So we'll get there. But once we get there, the cap will not be very beneficial to us.
If we had a cap and you have a cap on the number of ministers and you have a raft of special aides, assistants, special assistants, and all of that, and staffers.
It will still not solve the
problem. This number does not reduce those persons.
Does it?
Those other numbers.
But that is Malik's argument.
I believe Dr. Indum, when he says that we can do with how many ministers? 50, 40 or less, we can
but that is the argument that Malik is
that a large chunk of the...
If you get about 5 ministers, you can have about 1,000 special assistants, PAs, and all that, and they will still be drawing on the economy.
Perhaps
they will
not
be drawing
as much
from
as
that is an assumption. That is an assumption. But Malik, my point about the African elections and African governance system still remains. I'm telling you that, look, even as of today, with the 110 ministers that the president has, there's still pressure on him to appoint people to places. So it is so difficult. I think that we can't do this discussion without losing sight of that reality. It is a reality. Mahama had the same problem. Remember when Mahama was in office and appointed some young people who later came to be known by former President Rawlings as babies with sharp teeth, old evil drafts and all that. This is the reality of African politics. So once we are in this phase,
does it matter?
It doesn't make it. It doesn't make it unattractive. But it gets to Malik. It gets to a point where Shamima spoke about, where most young people find politics and public service as a lucrative venture. Now, you look at your classmates, look at your older brothers who are with you. Most of them are doing very well. Why? By courtesy of politics. So everybody sees that that is a shortcut. Unfortunately, that is the reality. We need to have a bigger discussion about it. And not just look at it in isolation in terms of just this president and the 110 ministers. Because even with that 110 ministers, you still have various avenues, institutions, departments, agencies, state enterprises that the president still appoints.
My last two questions on this. Does it matter that a large number of ministers is constituted by members of parliament who would have drawn salary anyway? Does it matter?
For me, it matters.
Secondly,
for me, it matters.
Secondly, are we seeking to eat our cake and have it?
You're repeating the president's justifications for this.
No, we want to have our cake and eat it because we make the demands from the politicians and then we turn around and accuse them.
No, but we didn't make the demands in this regard. I think let me do a take on
it. You just spoke about the increasing requests. In fact, the angry requests and demands for opportunities.
Those are in the political circles, the people around the president.
Who are Ghanaians, by the way.
Yes, but it's just a minute.
Can I say something? If you have people who cannot be successful
in life,
in private life, but only in politics, they don't deserve to be in politics. They just don't deserve to be there.
That's a headline.
Yeah.
and that's one of the challenges. It is okay to want to be a career politician and work all your life building capacity to be able to be an effective and efficient career politician. But the paradox of our understanding of the politician is a person that wills power and uses that power to leverage for their personal interest and progress, often at the expense of the larger number of people. Because if we actually understood the true meaning of service, service means you come to the table with something of value to contribute, with knowledge, with expertise, with passion and excitement, with ethical codes that are really unmatchable and unbreakable.
But the president is a good example. In his private life, he's been most successful.
And that's what I ever said, because I put up a post that the president must take time to understand whether or not he is at the same wavelength with all of his appointees.
He does not necessarily need to be.
You ought not to assume that which you aspire and wish for, that which you expect to be the ethos of the people you appoint.
That everybody shares in that belief.
The people, people have their own proclivities and their own motivations for coming into public office, and you need to keep an eye on that and really balance it.
So let's move on to that.
But you asked a question which we haven't answered. That does it matter whether those people are in parliament and also ministers? I think that one point is key. If you look at the last parliament, in the last days of the last parliament, the speaker has been outrageous. He's been forced to shut down parliament. He's been forced to postpone parliament and other members of parliament to be present in the house before they start proceedings because there was no quorum. This is a classic example of the constitutional requirement.
18 people in parliament.
The constitutional requirement that pushes the president to appoint majority of his ministers from Parliament. I think we should do away with that. It's time that we do away with that constitutional requirement. It just isn't helping democracy and the effectiveness of separation of powers. It's not helping us.
Now,
you often come to Parliament and members of Parliament who ought to be focused on the work of formulating laws are not there. How many times have we seen lawyers or ordinary citizens going to the Supreme Court to seek constitutional interpretations on laws that contravene the Constitution that Parliament ought to have known? Parliament ought to have known at the time. But it was on everybody's blind side. Why? Because Parliament is so busy doing so many things. Half of the people in Parliament are busy in other areas, serving as ministers, lobbying for projects, playing roles as executives. In the 110 ministers that Samson was talking about, for instance, Professor Jambafo, yesterday we pointed him out. He's a minister at the office of the president. Doing what?
Development.
Development, really. Really. The job that Dr. Akuto is doing can just be nicely done by finance.
And evaluation.
Because the finance ministry itself has over 20 assistants. One of them can just be assigned a desk to do monitoring and evaluation. Senior minister can even do that job. But even if you scrap that senior minister's job, an effective chief of staff automatically does monitoring and evaluation. The president himself can has an executive assistant. Can't he help the president to do that job?
Let's move on from this one and talk about some of the other big stories for you that happened in the year, those that stand out.
I think that we've spoken about the elections, which is very key, a significant issue. But I think that we must also give former President Mahama some credit. It's the first time he served as one-term president. That was very significant. You know, having taken over from Professor Mills and having won the elections just after 3 months of campaigning. Won the elections, like he says, to quote him, one touch. Going into his own election and losing miserably from comfortable lead to an uncomfortable opposition. You know, so it's very significant. But what I take is his response, his demeanor, his acceptance, and the process to reorient himself into opposition. I think that is really held. But one of the key issues also because of that loss flowing into the minority in Parliament, and we discussed this in the dying days of last year on Newsfile about the allegations of corruption and what I said at the time that was the crisis that would happen in NDC with the exit of President Mahama. And I said that there was going to be 3 factions in NDC, and we are seeing some of those factions. It started in Parliament. Because of that exit of President Mahama from office, you have now the opposition, the minority in Parliament being strengthened, because now that's the only mouthpiece of the NDC.
Yeah, and
NDC itself has to go through a process.
They are doing well so far.
They are doing well, but they have to survive that crisis in the leadership. Remember the allegation against Muntaka and Haruna Idrisu. That was a war. A war to stampede some people's authority in the leadership of that house. Because in opposition, all you have, the strongest pillar you have in opposition is your minority in the house.